večer vsem obiskovalcem. Včasih začeli in tole bo edino v slovenščini, zaradi tega, ker so nam pač povedali, da bomo imeli danes debato v angleščini, to da upam, da ste nesli tudi svoje druge babilonke iz štotorskega oblika. Debata je tako v grobem zamišljena, da nekaj časa govorimo mi, pa damo prostor tudi vam s tem, da ni naslovljivno prekinjati ali pa postavljati pod vprašanja zaradi tega, ker mi smo vsi tako drugačni insideri in se lahko zgodi, da bomo začeli v neki točke vati več kot sami sebe, kar pa ni smisel tega, da smo to tukaj. So, a warm welcome from me. I will not be too long for this introduction. Basically, we're going to discuss who are the ones and what are the forces that are making lives of working journalists in Slovenia difficult. That's it. And I leave this other topics to my guests. So here, at my first left, is Nelly Jansen. She's a legal expert of Media Legal Defense Initiative. It's an NGO that offers legal advice for journalists, bloggers, and independent media institutions. The second left is Natasha Pürtz-Musser. She's a former information commissioner, and now she's running, I don't know if there's an English translation of what she's running now, but let's say it's Info House. What is it? Thank you. My first right is my colleague, double colleague, Anushka Delic. Double colleague. She's a journalist and also a colleague at the same media house. And on my far right is my second colleague, Primož Cirman, who's also a journalist and who is Neonik. And in the middle is Mr. Cenegacher, and he's a legal representative of the largest TV producing house, Okrogla, better known as Spot TV and others. First words and first introduction belongs to our guests. And I think that the organizer wanted, I hope he told you that you were the one to open this discussion. You weren't, and to briefly outline what you do and the state of affairs in this field. Because who and what is making lives of journalists, bloggers, and independent media professionals so difficult.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I was indeed asked to say a few words about our view as an organization that works worldwide to defend independent media, journalists and bloggers. What the trends are that we see worldwide in the prosecution of journalists. Just a little bit of background. Our organization is based in London but has a worldwide mandate, as was just explained, to help independent media defend their rights in court. We currently have a little over 100 cases on our docket in about 50 different jurisdictions. So I think we have a rather nice overview of what's going on. And looking at our caseload and at the cases that we have been working on over the years, the thing that strikes me the most is the endless creativity of those in power in trying to obstruct journalists in doing their work. Of course, there are very traditional ways to prosecute journalists. Defamation, criminal and civil, is a very common occurrence still, and it still makes up about a third of our casework at MLDI. But you also see really creative charges being made up. Tax evasion, what else do we have? Terrorism is a very popular one at the moment. And things such as competition lawsuits. You can make it up and it happens. But I wanted to say a little bit about the trends that we see in all those cases that we defend. And I wanted to highlight three main areas that we have a lot of casework in. The first, as I just mentioned, is defamation. I think we all know that criminal defamation is an issue. I understand that here you still have criminal defamation laws in the book, as in many other countries. As you probably know, in the UK was only abolished fairly recently as well. I just think it's important to also realize that it's not only criminal defamation that's a problem. We see in those few countries that have decriminalized defamation, but also by means of civil lawsuits, it's very, very possible to effectively shut down media outlets or silence journalists by getting awards that award very high sums in damages to the claimants. An example that I can give is, for example, in Azerbaijan, where we've done quite a lot of work. As you're probably aware, the situation there is deteriorating very rapidly at the moment. The prosecution there of Azadlik, one of the last really independent newspapers in the country, by a systematic series of lawsuits, which is this libel award after libel award, up to the point where they're just no longer able to pay, in combination with other administrative measures, is basically, putting the newspaper out of business, and that is a very worrying trend. Not too far away, in Macedonia, defamation has been decriminalized as well, and also there is a big problem with the civil claims that are being filed, which are really, really high and really difficult for individual publications and for individual journalists to fight back on. So this is something to keep in mind when thinking of the issue of defamation. Another major theme is national security slash terrorism, which is a species of that. Anushka can talk a bit about that, I'm sure. And we see it worldwide. It's, to say it a little bit frivolously, it's an easy sell for a government. It's a very compelling argument. Yes, we have to protect our national interests. It's for your own good. We have to all be safe. That's the most important thing. But it actually leads to quite, outrageous and ridiculous situations. We have defended nationally and are still representing internationally 2 female journalists from Rwanda who were deemed with their local language newspaper of a circulation of about 100 every 2 weeks to have threatened national security by publishing articles that were critical of things such as the government agricultural policy and criticism about the lack of prosecution for corruption in government. I personally failed to see the link, and we definitely hope that the African Commission will feel the same about that, because that is where we escalated the case to, but it's quite outrageous. Ethiopia is also where we have been defending and are still defending a number of journalists who've been accused of terrorism, and the only evidence that was actually presented against them at trial was their writing, their journalistic writing, and these were things that just dealt with regular matters of public interest. How does the main political party in charge function? What of their plans for economic development? Things like that, normal things for public debate. So yeah, that's number 2 on my list. And then the third one is a trend that we see in the restriction of content on the internet. And I mention this in particular because there are lots of jurisdictions in which this is the only place where people can still go and publish. The space has become very narrow in a number of countries to get a license to print, to get a press card in order to be able to actually practice journalism or get your news out. So people take to the internet and publish their more critical pieces there. And what do you see? You see that websites are just being taken off the internet. And in Pakistan, we're supporting a local organization, Bites for All, that has been fighting a now over 2-year-long battle in trying to get YouTube unblocked in the country. But not only YouTube, which is, besides a nice channel for cute cat videos, also an actual channel for serious news, and also more importantly for independent news, because people can publish there what they want. Basically what the situation is there is that someone in government there at the communications authority can just pull a switch. They have blanket powers to take websites offline. There are no checks and balances in the system, and they're actually fighting to get those websites that are now blocked, unblocked, and also to get a system in place to make sure that when this happens in the future, this can be challenged properly. There are other things also, that's Pakistan as an example, but a little bit closer to home. Italy. There are a lot of takedown requests in the country. There it's actually quite difficult to get a website taken offline, or to get content taken offline on the basis of a defamation claim. But what's really easy is to come with a copyright claim. So that is being used a lot, and people are scared. People don't want to be facing a lawsuit that lasts forever, so they take down the content really quickly and they don't even fight back. So just to say that there are different ways of very effectively taking content out of the public space. My second part actually is what do you do to counter all of this? I have two main points there. My first is that it's really important to fight back. The moment that you stop doing that, the end is lost, basically. And while it's really daunting to face a lawsuit and having to consider all the implications that it might have for you personally, it's really something to seriously consider. And there are organizations that can help, such as ours, so please all get in touch whenever you're in trouble. But it is really important to push back, because otherwise you basically give carte blanche to those who don't like what you print or what you publish on the internet to take away your right to speak. My second point is that it relates to something that I've always found a little bit puzzling that I've seen in our work, is that journalists write very little about other journalists, and I'm always a bit confused about that, because I would think that there would be a natural inclination to kind of take an interest in your own profession and in your colleagues, if not, at least in your own country, but also a little bit further away, or jurisdictions that deal with similar issues perhaps as yours. But it's really important to keep these items on the radar and keep this in the public arena and make this a point of public discussion, because people need to know, otherwise it can't be addressed. So those were the points that I would like to make, and now I'll give the microphone back to our moderator.
Thank you. I still see Ms. Pierce more of she's in another role, but after 2 terms of being the mighty information commissioner, yes, that everybody was almost afraid of. 10 years ago, we thought that internet is a brilliant idea. It was in the rise, we had citizen journalism, we had bloggers, access of information acts, everything seemed possible. You could publish almost everything, you could get access to information you otherwise couldn't have. But now we have Snowden. We, as journalists and also other people, are being traced, watched, quantified, analyzed, pretty much everything. And on the other hand, it's almost impossible to get any legal information about how the Secret Service works, who's being under surveillance and why. It's also almost impossible to sue either Google or Facebook, because everything they do is a trade secret, almost. And we're now facing a huge information imbalance between the citizens and also journalists, who are being more and more transparent, and the information holders, who are being less and less transparent and are shielded behind the walls of legislation, state and trade secret. Is it a wrong impression, a right one? Do we have the means to fight back?
I'm definitely one of the believers who thinks that we have to fight back and that we do have means to seek the information. But more and more I also am aware of the fact that all the governments in the world will tend to hide information, always. But I have one very simple sentence for them. You can hide certain information for some time, but you can never hide all the information forever. So this is what the access to public information is all about. And I think that this is one of the strongest tools that the media can use. And in Slovenia, they do use it, but not so often as I would like them to use the Access to Public Information Act. Anshka is one of the few journalists who's using the Act to gain the information. I do understand the troubles that the media have also, because, Freedom of Information Acts and the procedures tend to be slow. And if you seek the information, you have to wait for it for a year or even 2 years if you sue, if the public sector body sues even the information commissioner before the administrative court. And it takes 2 years to gain the information. This is why I do understand that also whistleblowing is part of the checks and balances system. Because if the media cannot get the information fastly through the Information Act, through the Freedom of Information Act, then the whistleblowers are there to give them the information faster. But this is also a kind of a danger ground. I do think that also the media should often be aware that freedom of expression, which is one of the fundamental human rights for every democratic system, is not an absolute human right. It is always limited by the rights of others. I often talk about privacy, which is on the balance scale very often. But also secret data can be on a balance scale. And you can never claim as a media that you have an absolute power to reveal everything. This is why I strongly believe that so-called public interest test, sorry, I'm too loud, that the public interest test is a kind of a tool which helps the media, the information commissioners around the world, the courts, to strike the right balance between access to public information, freedom of expression, and other rights. And what's the public interest test all about? What's the public interest all about? Just bear in mind that if something is merely interesting for the public, it doesn't mean that it's in the public's interest. So this is what the information commissioner's work is basically all about, trying to strike the right balance and to persuade the people to have guts to ask. I strongly believe that the need to know should become the right to know. So that you do have the right to ask, you do have the right to appeal, you do have the right to have guts to ask. For example, in ex-Yugoslavia or in ex-communist countries, there was always a paradigm when, the governing party, one, had the power to say which kind of information is going to be revealed to the public. This is not the case anymore. Now the public has the right to ask, and the public sector bodies have to use the Freedom of Information Act to decide whether a certain information can become public or access can be denied. There are exemptions. Secret data is one of them, classified data. But the exemptions are there to be used and not to be abused. So this is what I try to preach, if I may use this word.
Maybe we could also add something else, that it's a citizen's right. It's not a journalist's right, it's not a media company's right,
it's not a citizen's right, it's a human right. If we discuss legally a citizen's right, that means that only citizens of certain country have the right to ask for information. Access to public information is a human right. Everybody can ask for it.
So you don't need to wait for us.
No, a person from Croatia can ask the Slovenian government for the information. So it's not limited.
So if you're an NGO, if you're a blogger, you don't need, to wait for us, the journalists, to do all the work. You can do it, publish it, and well, you're free to do so. You have the same legal framework as we do. We work there. We are institutionalized. It's not our free time, but it's our job to do it. But everybody can do it. Mr. Götter, I know that you're paid to do the opposite, but if you were the one to kill a story in Slovenia, if you're the one to kill a story in Slovenia, what tools from your toolbox would you use?
That's a naughty question.
Let's talk about mine. I'm not in the opposite side because I work for Okrogla, so I'm on the right side.
No, I mean, you're not the one who's killing the stories. You're depending.
The question was exactly what?
If you were the one to kill a story, which tool would you use? Or to frame the question differently, the ones who are killing stories of your journalists, how they try to do it?
They have, the criminal procedure is quite rare here, because there are so many, much more discreet and, in most cases, even worse possibilities. A lot of control for certain authorities. You have direct calls, even in such cases are. we had quite a lot of lawsuits. We had only a few criminal procedures that were all stopped even in the middle of the procedure, or was dropped by the court deciding upon prosecution's papers. We do have quite a lot of cases in which some companies or even state-owned companies are suing for, let's say, damages that actually are not damages, with quite big sums, in order to put some pressure. But in our system, big damages are quite rare, so it doesn't happen anymore that big claims are filed, but still it happens. When I was talking about other pressures, we as a media, as a company, have just a few days ago we had another inspection for one of our shows. We have almost every year when we start some project, we have a lot of inspections right away, checking that. We had a case, Competition Protection Agency, as you all know. I could speak that all night, but I won't. So there are many other possibilities that just seems more decent, but they actually are not.
What is the new strategy? Why would an institution want to make so much work for you? Is it buying time? Is it trying to, I don't know, discourage journalists to pursue certain stories? Or
I think in a lot of cases it's not about the institution, it's about people in institutions who are using their power to sustain that. The fact that the institution is behind him and he's just, or she is just using the position to put some pressures, something like that. I don't like to see a lot of conspiracy theories, because in the end you see that actually it's not the state it's against you. It's the state is just, or the government just used as a backup for persons that are part of this,
Anushka, you are now a subject of such treatment.
I am a subject.
Yes. And how does it work for you? What
How does it work for me?
Yes. What effect does the ones who sue you actually have? How is it? Are they just killing your time, making you nervous, or how does it work? I mean, what if you just never experienced that?
I always say that it's a mixed bag of feelings. In a way, at first when I found out about it, or when my mother called me in the morning in March of 2013 and said that there were 2 criminal police officers in front of her door wanting to speak to me, I was really pissed off, and all I wanted to do was write about them on the front page. And then my lawyer kept me back, thankfully. But so yeah, I guess anger. Why? Why is the main question that keeps popping up. But it is what it is. In a way, it gives us all a chance to talk about something that we are not usually talking about, whether it's within the profession or between lawyers and journalists and so on. So, I don't know, I'm starting to look at it from this sort of positive outlook, that perhaps this will bring some closure or something new, something better. So, in this sense, I don't really have a problem with being the subject. It's probably not something I should say publicly, but people who know me know I'm direct and honest, and this is honestly how I feel. So, bring it on, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, the question for the fighters is, Anushka is, let's say, the lucky one, because she still works for a big media institution that does have certain legal support for the case. Mr. Gerger is the one who is also does have legal support in these cases, so the journalists can be helped. But many journalists, not to mention others, independent media workers, they're just not as lucky. For example, if you run a blog page and if you receive a letter full of legal threatening terms, how do you react? How can you know that you're not guilty and how will you fight back?
Oh, it's me. I guess it's also a question of, journalists are different personalities. Some are, a little crazy, like me, and they say, "Go fuck your." Oh, sorry. Beep, yeah.
So we see to your mind.
Yeah, but in a sense, it's a really sick sort of compliment from the government. Okay, so we pissed someone off. They're abusing their power to prosecute a journalist. In this case, or in many other cases, whether it's defamation or supposed alleged publication of classified information, they are abusing their right. So obviously we did something good, right? So yeah, it's a sick sort of compliment, no? Don't you think?
I think that we discussed it with Primož while we were still co-workers 10 years ago. If we're not being, let's say, if we're not making somebody nervous at the other side, which is the center of power, then maybe it's the question, are we actually bothering the center of power or not? So certain pressures are definitely part of our work. So it's not about whining. Oh no, we have pressures and phone calls and everything. It's just a part of what we do. Otherwise, we could just write about style, food, similar stuff. And the other thing that also changed in this last decade is that maybe 10 years ago, the forces behind these pressures were mostly coming from the politics. And then after this huge redistribution of power and capital happened, there were the interests within the public companies, and all the mighty people with the capital, the advertisers. But now, we discussed that pretty much lately, and he said that because he covers economy, and he said that this power shift has happened recently, that you cannot really pinpoint the ones who are doing the pressures. Because 10 years ago, you had some political parties, then you have some people running huge state-owned companies that were appointed by those people, political powers. Then you have like 4 or 5 lobbying centers, and it was pretty easy. If you followed maybe 5 media companies, you could see that every interest group was running sort of different media institutions. So if you were reading like 5 different media, you could get quite a good impression of what's going on in the States and who's running what. But now it got really puzzled. How come?
First of all, regarding the previous question, I know they say that don't go into kitchen, feel hot. But from my personal experience, the hardest thing for a journalist is to become a story himself. That's awful. And so I would like to say respect all my colleagues, Anushka and the other ones that are actually dealing with court cases, criminal interrogations, and other unpleasant stuff. Now, regarding environment in our wonderful country, Slovenia, things were easier 10 or 15 years ago. We knew who the enemy was. It was politics. So actually, there were people inside government or ministerial cabinets that were calling journalists, or in some cases, even the Prime Minister personally used to call quite a lot of media. But he lasted only 2 years, probably because of that too. So this shift from political pressures to pressures made by pillars of economic power came, in my opinion, around 2007, and but it changed because of the crisis. Why? Well, our colleague doesn't know, but many pillars of economic power in Slovenia simply crumbled in recent years. Actually, they went bankrupt. There's actually no economic power in Slovenia anymore. When we talk about capital pressures,
What
We will actually talk about debt pressure, because they are owners of debt, not capital. But why do I think the situation now is much harder than before? Because journalists now are subject of two kinds of pressures. First is the normal one, pressure from politics. I don't believe that there are some differences between governments, but their goal is basically the same, to actually control the information produced about them. We used to have a government that did this more radically, and we have had governments that are doing that through various army of, I call them free shooters. Some other people call them lobbyists. Other people call them messengers, things like that. So it's very, very murky. And the second type of pressure is, of course, economical one still, because all the newspapers now are starving for the money, for marketing, and well, I believe actually that ads now have never been cheaper, and so therefore it's an easy tool to influence the media, of course. But the third type of pressure, I believe, is most dangerous. It is the type of pressure connected to the state of media houses today. Actually, there were many layoffs in recent years. It's almost impossible now to get a job in Slovenian media. Younger generation of journalists are working basically like slaves, with no basic working rights, and I believe that it's very easy to pressure them. It's one mistake, you're out. There are like 10, 15 people waiting for them outside. I mean, at least they're told. And it's almost impossible to attack someone without someone covering your back. And I think the third type, this kind of pressure will be means something very dangerous for the future of Slovenian journalism. I think that without strong media houses that invest in journalists, there is almost impossible that journalists are doing their job.
Because it may sound ironic, but I think that the three of us are probably one of the youngest people who got real jobs in journalism. So that's definitely changing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what Primož said is definitely true. The third sort of pillar of problems of Slovenian media journalists, but this coupled with the wider trend of power centers, regardless of whether they're debt centers or not, really coming down hard on journalists in Slovenia and in other countries in Europe. I think that there's a sort of dangerous trend here, and that we are sort of now realizing that we are better than Rwanda you mentioned before, which is Slovenes love that, when they feel that they're a little better than someone else, or that it's not so bad. But we are heading in a very, very strange direction, and if we take into account what Primož mentioned, and this sort of trend of putting all sorts of pressure, legal pressures on journalists, we're in big problems. And young journalists, like we were one of I was employed on the 1st of January in 2011. I think I was one of the last in Delo, and I'm 38 soon. So this is I'm so young. And then there are my colleagues here in 1, 2, 3, third row who are working there really hard, and there's no prospect right now for them to be employed. So what happens when my colleagues that are not employed are subjects of legal pressures, of defamation lawsuits and so on? This is a big problem. Who is going to help them out?
Well, that's also that biggest paradox in Slovenia now that the media right now is made by, you won't believe it, banks. The same banks that were actually saved by Slovenian taxpayers, who invested a few billion euros in it, through direct money, through money or bonds. Natasha had a lot of fight with banks. Why are the banks so powerful right now? Well, because all owners, basically all owners of Slovenian media are very much dependent on their, they live on their mercy. So they cut their loans, they actually stop their loans, they die. And so you have these situations that wouldn't happen a few years ago, that the bankers are sending this huge amount of papers to journalist ethics committee. They charge journalists almost on a weekly basis, and journalists are subject to investigations if some information leaked from these banks. So actually, banks that people will expect that they actually behave transparently, have actually increased their aggression and closed themselves even more than before. And I believe this is an issue that journalists, we all as a community, didn't actually address in enough powerful way.
And maybe there's another one. There was a bizarre case when civil societies or fake civil societies also put a lot of pressure, especially the ethics commissions of the journalists, for instance. It became pretty dangerous to write about vaccines in Slovenia, because there is a group of anti-vaxxers that would stalk you on social network. They would flood either the ombudsman or the ethics commission if they believed that you were not fairly representing their values. And okay, that they would, you might think that they're claiming that the Earth is flat, but it doesn't really stop them from doing that. So do you also see this change, that not only the usual players are still there and powerful, but you have a lot of problems with fake civil societies, astroturfing, internet portals that pretend to be alternative media, but they are basically just propaganda tools, because it's pretty common, especially in certain areas, that you have interest groups that don't really act as interest groups, but they start alternative media organization, or defending truth, or just showing the other side of the story.
I have to say that it's not really a very common occurrence in our practice at the moment. I mean, I've seen a couple of examples. We're supporting a case in Latvia where a group of pro-life activists has sued a publication in what appears to be a frivolous lawsuit, because they're not really putting any effort into it. They're just basically harassing the publication in question. But I have to say that's not a huge percentage of cases that's on our docket at the moment. Yeah.
So most of them are the usual suspects, or?
Yes, I think the majority of the claimants or the powers behind prosecutions, when you look at criminal cases, are still governments, those related to government, and indeed the people with big business interests. It's those who are on the top of the economic food chain. It's also a matter of having the resources, right? Hiring a lawyer to file a civil claim costs money. You very rarely see individuals that don't have a great amount of resources at their disposal doing that just for the fun of it, or just because they don't agree with the publication. So yes, it's a lot of usual suspects.
And the same goes for the small websites. Because even if you run a forum and you get something, or maybe that's another question. But for example, if you run a website and if the police comes to you and says, well, we wanted to get all the information about the users of your forum because we got a complaint that there is hate speech there, I think that only few people, I'm not, maybe owners is not the right word because it's not really owning anything, but people who are running portals, it's pretty difficult, to see and know the legislation well enough to reply, just to say, well, when the police has the right to come to you and ask for information, or when a copyright holder has the right to say, well, shut that down, or...
That and very often unclear legislation in the book, or just bad legislation. You see it a lot in India at the moment, who have Electronic Publications Act, under which it's really difficult to tell for those who run websites exactly what they have to do the moment that they're faced with a takedown request. And a lot of people just choose to err on the side of caution, right? Same as the example that I just mentioned about getting a copyright claim all of a sudden. Or getting, most people when they get an angry letter from a lawyer, they'll freak out and they'll just think, okay, I have to get rid of this before I know it. I have to mortgage my house to pay for my lawyer's bills. I might lose my house, etc. So they just,
Yeah, it's not worth it.
They will probably decide it is kind of better safe than sorry and just
delete.
Yeah.
Question for those journalists, because you were both considered to be one of the few investigative journalists in Slovenia, meaning that you have to deal daily with contact sources, with leakers, with sensitive information, and this landscape really became very complicated. You don't know where your sources are coming from, you don't know where the documents are coming from, you don't know how to verify them. Quite often you get something that you cannot legally get, even through the freedom of information. So what's your strategy? How do you avoid being, just a messenger? Another one, how do you avoid being, just a target of a specific lobbying group, saying, well, yeah, I know this Tillman guy, he's the one, he wants to get the story, published sooner than somebody else, and if I come to him and give him this hot new document, would he, just run and publish it? And how do you handle this? Is it, personal?
Well, thank you for that question. You always get a label. That's in a while. That's part of the job. But situation is now better than it was years ago. Why? Because this crisis has changed the mentality of people in Slovenia. Before that, there were people saying, okay, I got a job, I'm happy, I'm working with this lousy boss, I have my free time, our company is doing well, I'll just sit here for 20, 30 years, wait for my retirement, and I won't deal with anything other than that. But now, the future of people here is much more fragile. People are much more afraid, they're much more sensitive to the things that are happening around them. They're much more sensitive to corruption. 10 years ago, they were much more tolerant to a good businessman that was just putting a few bucks in his pocket. Now, actually, they're not. They're actually comparing them to themselves. They know that they are working for that amount of money for like 10 years, and they like to talk about it more than before. So actually, if you want sources in Slovenia, you can get it everywhere. I mean, people talk now a lot, and
but do they talk the truth?
yes, there's always a risk, of course, that you're misused for another interest. That's normal part of the job.
Yeah.
And
that's what we do.
There's no point to blind ourselves that people who talk don't have interest of their own. From a political party that wants to kick another political party out of government. From the one guy who thinks he's better than the guy above. From one civil servant who is actually who is stuck on his ministry for 20 or 30 years, and he hates all these young guys coming every year, messing around, doing things with his friends. So
Taking higher position than him.
but it's always up to journalists. First of all, you have to have a will to do it. I mean, you can be a journalist and be easy. So you can rewrite official information, stuff like that, go home. But you can go out and find these people. Or you don't have to, they will find you. But you have to spend time with them, gain them trust, you have to verify information, etc., etc. So if you actually see what journalists in Slovenia have written in 5 or 6 years, that's huge stuff. I mean, maybe we don't have like giant stories like Snowden, okay, but that's logical because we are a 2 million country. But actually, if you put things together, what we have investigated, what we have revealed, I think there's no reason that we can be proud of. With resources that are much more smaller than resources of any average media house abroad. We are actually working in terrible conditions here. I would say that free PR servants there's a ratio between PR and journalism. I would say 3 to 1. They just keep on coming. They're everywhere, but the journalists are disappearing.
Yeah, there was a study, I think, last year that in the US there was 7 PR people on every journalist.
So we have these
7.
So we have these pillars of power investing more and more into protection of their power, and on the other hand, we have journalists who are actually there on their own. They're cost cutted every year. For instance, one of the big problems in Slovenia journalism is that actually there are now issues that demand a lot of knowledge. I believe that 9 out of 10 journalists, or better, 99 out of 100 journalists 5 years ago didn't have a clue about what bonds are and what are the percentages that Slovenia has to pay when about debt, etc., etc. But actually, this is now the most important story in Slovenia. Who owns Slovenian debt? We don't know. This information has been made public this year. And for investigating that, you need a lot of resources. You maybe have to travel to London, anywhere where financial markets live. And you also need to have a lot of knowledge for that, because financial markets are basically computers producing algorithms that do something that we call derivatives.
Yeah, they're trading them.
And we all believe that actually, and they have human characteristics. They're nervous, they're angry, they're satisfied. And of course, but if media houses don't invest into the education of journalists, they won't get stories about that. Simple as that.
Mr. Gercher, do media houses give enough legal support in such stories? For example, if I'm preparing a story and I would work for you, how would you help me? Would you sit with me and discuss this document? Would you do a risk evaluation? Would you instruct me how to? Well, actually, you're, I think, the only media house in Slovenia that actually have a steady legal support for what you do, as far as I know.
Yeah, well,
The others only rent you.
yes, I would. You seem nice, so I would. But the problem is that quite rarely the journalists actually ask some questions that I would see as quite important. Let's say they have quite a lot of questions for things that aren't so complicated. Quite rarely they come with questions that would I put if I would be a journalist. So I don't know what's the reason, or maybe we must consider that our media is TV media, which means that you have only 1 minute and 20 seconds to say something, which is quite hard. You cannot go into the details. We had a few months ago, we had a kind of school for journalists for things that you were talking about, economy, basics of the things that you have to know. But me as an attorney, I'm every day there and available to questions. But even sometimes happens that I see something and I say, well, that was wrong, because, you know, it's quite wrong. So, but that's it. I must still be polite when I'm speaking this, but I would say that the journalists who wouldn't need to ask, they always ask. But journalists who would have to ask, they never ask, because they know everything. So, because we are quite a little off topic, I would like to ask a question. It seems to me that we are just complaining, and my question would be, what will we do in the future, or what we do? And another question is, the state of journalism in this country is probably a reflection of the state of country itself, or state of mind, or things like that.
Institutions.
So my question is, do you see as journalists any connection to that? Are you part of the problem? Probably.
It's really nice of you to ask that, because that's something also I said, that we don't do that. We don't really cover stories about journalists, and the media. What we do, are we part of the problem? We never really address this question, basically. So you were sure.
Yeah. The thing that I notice in my lovely country is that we are prosecuting corruption in many aspects of the Slovenian life. There is a first judge now who's going to go to jail. There was a first prosecutor who's prosecuted. We do not have a case, a journalist case, that a journalist would be prosecuted because of the corruption. Okay, Vlado Budušek is one of them. He's the only one. His story is a little bit different than the story of somebody else who's taking bribe, and a story of a journalist who's writing a story that somebody else wrote. So this is also a problem, but I would just like to add something what Sana just said. I know a lot about privacy and freedom of expression. I do not know everything. But the only media house which invited me to give a lecture to journalists was Media House Večer. Nobody else. And I did it pro bono. I didn't charge anything. And I think that you do not use just a simple word, please, can you come and tell us something about the expertise that you do possess? The questions are never there from the media. Why? Do you really think that you do know everything? That it is enough just to ask a couple of questions and not to, at least try to get more profound knowledge on a certain topic that you want to be an expert of? So this is my question to you.
Collectively, we're guilty of not really trying harder to learn new tools, to broaden our horizons, and we are collectively also part of the problem. I can't disagree with that, but I'm saying collectively because this is a very bad generalization. I don't like to generalize like this. What I feel, and I keep saying this all over and over again, we always talk about others. We always bring others to, put them on the spot. We ask them tough questions or sometimes really soft questions if we don't know what we're doing. But we never ask ourselves, the profession, who we are, what are we doing, what's wrong, which standards do we have, do we even have standards? We were talking about sources before. Do we know really in Slovene, can we say off the record, on background, on deep background? Do we have words for that? Do we even know what they mean in Slovene? Do we know what we want to use them for? We just use, and I'm guilty of that, we just use several according to our sources, so we don't have really any standards here pertaining to sources. This is just one little thing that is a problem. So I would like to see more like constructive, critical also discussions regarding this, because we do have our share and our burden, and we need to carry it and not be a part of the problem, and to be a part of the solution. But right now, given all the three pillars of media destiny at the moment in Slovenia, I don't really see how we can be a part of the solution at the moment.
Can I just add one more question? Maybe pretty much you can answer. It's just, is it really a fact that media today in Slovenia do not have time to do a proper investigative journalism? It's only an instant journalism. You start a story and I often see a story without conclusion. Then you go to another story, to another story. You just leave the old stories behind. Is that a problem as well, that you do not go, or you do not have time to do the investigative stories correctly? Because of the pressure of the lobbyists, because your editors are not standing beside you, they don't give you enough time to do the proper investigative stories? What's the problem?
Well, maybe I can try to answer with another generalization. Media companies are just companies that are also a part of Slovenian space. And I think that every company that I visited, and every public sector company, or even every ministry or sub-ministry or NGO there you visit, you have a outline of how things are done. You have one of the things that I learned when I was visiting other important media companies in the world. It's not that journalists, like the Guardian, Times, or the Medium, or others are better than journalists here. It's mostly about leadership, strategists, owners, knowing what you do. They face the same problems. They are not living in any sort of paradise. If you, for example, if you follow data journalism, and you probably know data blogs at the Guardian or at New York Times. From our perspective, when you see all those beautiful information graphics and spreadsheets and everything, you would say it's an institution. You need 50 people to do it. Otherwise, it's not worth it, or you cannot even try. Come on, it's like one employee plus some people who actually help them. But they know what they do, and we don't have it here. And the problem is in media. I think it's the leadership. In every company, again, be it the media company or the ministry, you have, let's say, 1/3 of people, it's a cliche of course, but you have 1/3 of people who do nothing. You have another third of people who are in between. If they're motivated, if they work in a stimulating environment, they're doing their job, otherwise they're just joining the first third. And then you have the last third, the people who actually do the job. In the good times, when there is enough money, no editor would dare, to motivate the first third or to do something and to help the other third. But they would compensate both thirds with part-timers. Nobody would address, the institutional lack of leadership and everything, but you would simply, because newspapers were money machines. Not to mention commercial television. In 2004, I think there were 2-digit return of capital on newspapers. The newspapers had it, but yeah, almost 20% return of capital in 2004. Commercial television was even higher, and you could compensate, for 50 people who didn't work anything. You could easily hire very cheaply, and no, not so cheap. You could actually pay, part-timers quite a lot of money. But today, this money is gone. The 1/3 that doesn't function, still doesn't function. The other third in the middle leans to the first third. And the last third is overstressed and cannot do anything but pursue this imperative of we have to get this newspaper published tomorrow and fill it with something. And the same goes, for websites. So it's one of the reasons is definitely institution. and active leadership and no leadership. That's one of the objective problems and answers to the question. So it became, of course, very difficult to follow some stories. And that's also the reason what Primož said. It's true. If you have the time, and if you go to documentation, to archives, you see that if you put the pieces of information together, then almost every story about Slovenia, how things are working, how some company was privatized, how people were appointed by the government or by certain political parties, everything is out there. But it's never told as a coherent story. Because to actually tell a coherent story, it's not enough to have a couple of days. You need weeks. You need a lot of support from professionals and, of course, from your editors. And even me, I'm almost an aristocrat. I work for Sobota Priloga, which is a weekly within a daily. So I have a luxury of having 3-4 days for 2-page articles, like 15,000. And that's a luxury, which is rare. And still, of course, by many editors or people around, it's those are the ones who write only one article a week. And maybe, especially on Monday or Tuesday, you could easily fill in maybe a blog for this and a video for that, and maybe something for this page. And that's, that's how things run. And if you have...
They write 4 articles a day.
Exactly. Exactly. And a journal, for example, if you're a part-timer working for a journal online, you have more of 5 articles a day during their peak. So that's it.
We're challenged. I don't think journalists are a big part of Slovenia, a big part of the problems that Slovenia is facing right now. Obviously, I would say that journalism as a profession in Slovenia is actually a very, very small part of all the problems that are in Slovenia. I think, but saying that we don't have a corruption case in our profession is a smart spin.
Do we have a corruption case?
Yes, we have.
Which one?
Mr. Budušek.
That's the only one.
And how many bankers' cases we have in corruption? Finished. None. So, not only prosecuted, but not. It's not only just started in court. Budušek was found guilty. So what is?
What do you think he's
doing? It doesn't matter what I think. The question was how many corruption. But I don't think the Kovacic is the only banker that took bribes. I personally believe it was not. But okay, I mean, how many doctors we know that took bribes to get people in lines in their order? Okay, how many doctors? So actually, if we return to your question, do we really actually investigate corruption in every field just because our investigators took down 10 tycoons? I don't think so. But the areas that I mentioned are, on my personal view, much more of a problem for Slovenia than journalists.
Yeah, but
everybody knows. I mean, it's a small country. I mean, there's not a lot of journalists in Slovenia. Maybe, I don't know, 200, 300.
No.
Like 2,000.
Okay, are they? Okay, but if you're in a profession for 5 years, we all know who works with someone and
But we're contributing to this
who
like
has
sense.
the largest amount of wealth, who was the late president of the board of Delo, who had millions in the
That
bank.
doesn't matter. We're still helping them hide stories that should have been brought out, should have been worked on, should have been brought out.
Yes.
And there are many, many stories out there, and 2 little journalists are working on them.
Yes,
and we both
And
know.
that is the answer to the second question. Unfortunately, I must agree, we don't conclude our stories. We actually too often jump from, like the dogs, from one stick to another. We are basically quite easy to be manipulated. One of the reasons is also the criteria that was mentioned by Mr. Gertrude, that some stories are televised and some are not. So you can't televise a story on bonds. You can't televise a story about, I don't know, okay, that has changed, thermal power plant. You can't televise a story on a banker that gave away bad loans. It's hard to televise it.
Yeah, but you can.
But you can. It's not hard to televise it.
But
the
you
way
can
it's
shoot
being
the documentary.
televised
It's much
is a
more
problem.
easy to actually stand outside the government headquarters and hold your mics.
But you see, so we are a part of the problem. We are not a big part of the problem,
Yeah,
but this is semantics. It doesn't
No,
have
but that
anything
problem
to do
is
with
Okay.
that problem has a solution.
collectively, not you, not
We have a guest here. She
Hi.
came from London.
Sorry.
Maybe
I
you
don't
could
know.
ask her something. And we talk about.
But it's a good question for our
Thank you
guests.
for a good point.
But it's a good question for our guests. How often does she, as a guest, comes to journalist meeting and listens to something like that? Journalist whining about how bad situation is.
I'm sure it's
There is a question from the public.
No, but it is an on-topic question in many ways.
totally on topic.
Yes, we're totally on topic.
We're here about prosecution. Yes. And we've been talking about everything else, corruption.
Okay.
Can somebody?
Yeah, we have a question from the public.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe it will break this
To the point.
sort of the topic thing. If you can just imagine for a second or two that you agree on what the problem is, but turning back to this, but just imagine for a second that you do agree, like there are problems, and actually journalists have been discussing about it in Slovenia also for 10 and many years, but turning to solutions, can maybe each of you maybe tell their opinion on what would be a solution on legal pressures on journalists? Not political, not how much time you have for a story, but turning to the original topic on legal pressures and what would be your solutions in Slovenian space. Because I see many solutions out there in, I don't know, in the UK or other countries, but in Slovenia, I mean, we don't have any reporting mechanisms. Who do you turn to? You turn to your editor, maybe sometimes you report something to the police if there's a huge pressure or threat to you. But do you turn to your journalistic society, or you don't probably even have someone to turn to, or there's no mapping of incidents and stuff. So I'm wondering of your opinion on that.
Can I just say what I miss in my lovely country? Strong NGOs fighting for freedom of expression, strong NGOs fighting for privacy, strong NGOs fighting for access to public information. As the Information Commissioner, I was often in a position that I was alone in a fight with the government, with the authorities. There were non-NGOs helping me with this fight. I don't know, maybe I'm not really very fair right now, but I do not know a single NGO like yours which would fight for the freedom of expression and which would help the media, the journalists, not the media, the journalists, in their daily calls of war. Is there one in Slovenia who's doing that? Well, yeah, it's 10 days old. So yes, I want to work in this field, definitely. But this is where I see that we can do something. Civil society should be more organized and help in the fields where the institution, the governmental institutions, or the institution like the Anti-Corruption Commission, Ombudsman, Information Commission, are there alone in the fight with the powerful people. Media is one of the journalists. But when you need help, where can you seek help? But you decide that you have to hire a court lawyer to fight for you in court.
I'm lucky the company hires the lawyer because I'm employed, but my colleagues that are not employed have a little bit of a problem.
Really? They would not?
No,
They would hire.
there was a set of an agreement within the company regarding a case by a lawyer, a journalist who is not employed and is subject of defamation.
Yeah, but part of the solution would be...
Can I just answer the question, the part of the solution? A part of the solution, I think, would be also for journalists to learn more about the legal framework of what actually they're dealing with. Like if you're dealing with national security, that you know the laws, that you know where and what is your legal framework. I think that is something that I see is missing, whether it's public information, whether it's protection of privacy, whichever area that you're working on, whether it's bonds into so I feel that there is not enough of this sort of focused legal education, or just wish to even an incentive, a self-incentive of journalists to try to learn more about this, and then you can also, it's easier to react in a way if you know your law, you know how to say to someone that is trying to, I don't know, maybe, threaten you or something over the phone or in conversations or in emails. If you know your laws, you know what to write back, you know what to say back, and keep them, and have them closed, shut up. So this is something that I think could be a solution.
One of the solutions that are often proposed by the NGOs or from foreign institutions is the transparency measures for media institution itself. To have fact checkers, to have an ombudsman, to have internal mechanism on how things are working, how they're performed. If there is some confirmation, the journalists actually ticked quite a few of the boxes that everything is okay. How important is it? Is it important that the media introduces such a mechanism to say that we are accountable, we have measures? If you are interested how we make our stories, you can see it. For example, The Guardian started this initiative quite recently that you can actually join and see the newsroom, how it's performing. Do you think it's a good strategy, or is it more of a wishful thinking?
I think it could certainly help. I think if you look at the Strasbourg case law, the European Court, one of the things that they weigh in their evaluation of national court judgments is whether or not the journalists in question practice journalism responsibly, right? How did they operate? Did they make a sufficient effort to verify their facts? Did they double check everything to the extent that they could, within also keeping in mind the fact that they usually have to deal with a very short deadline for publication, etc. So I do think that is something that's worthwhile. I also do think that it's not something that's feasible in every single context. You mentioned The Guardian, that's a huge publication. They will have the resources to set something up systematically. And I think on a very basic level, what was just said by two fellow panelists is at least awareness of journalists, what the legal framework is that they're operating in, so that they do know what the minimum requirements are, so they can actually regulate their conduct. Then if things go wrong, that there is support available. And that is often also a problem, There are plenty of lawyers, but there also have to be lawyers that are suitable to defend these types of cases properly. Because it can go terribly wrong. And then it can also go terribly wrong when you are in front of a judge who either isn't aware of or isn't willing to properly implement the laws that are on the books, and also to recognize what might be wrong with them, and to work with that. So yeah, those are all points on which I think attention could be focused in order to create a more balanced situation.
For example, just one sentence if you allow me. Minister of Justice and also the Prime Minister, on the grounds of your case, they said that the Criminal Procedure Act and the Criminal Code Act should be changed.
Yeah.
The Journalists Association should draft an article or 2 articles how to change the law immediately the next day. So this is what I am, I see the minus. Nobody's reacting, or Minister of Justice said, yeah, we should change the law.
The Association of Journalists was actually the one to propose a change of law, and then
With the
Prime
concrete
Minister
words?
tweeted about it, and the Minister.
Is there enough pressure now to make them change the law?
We are
You're doing
creating
that.
pressure, and
Okay.
we're working on a proposal. So
Okay.
we are being active, and we're. I'm repeating myself again, but we are not only asking for a change with regard to classified information, because we realized that in the previous law that was valid before in November 2008, there was a clause that would allow publication of classified information if it was in the public's interest and it wasn't harmful to the state. So that's one, and we're also asking for decriminalization of defamation. So we're going full force against the criminal code, and I'm happy that they're tweeting about it. Maybe they will change something too.
One of the reasons that it may seem, well, off topic, but it's not, no, it's, this question of trust is really important when it comes to pressures, because there's been 2 books and 2 recent studies in the US recently, plus a huge, Levison inquiry in the UK because of the hacking scandal that showed that in the UK, and especially in the States, the media in the last maybe 10 years are enjoying the unprecedented freedom of speech and expression. It's almost impossible in the US to successfully sue a journalist, to kill a story, and the reason, however, hacking scandals and this misuse of trust, of reckless journalism is changing the attitude of the judges and of the DAs and of other people who are less willing to protect journalists than they used to be maybe 5 years ago. And the European Court of Justice is an exception. There is still very strong. It's really hard to. They do protect journalists, but especially in the nation states, it's just not the case. So I think that yes, there should be something to improve this trust.
Were you speaking highly of the United States just now, or did I? No, I'm serious.
No.
Because maybe I understood something wrong. Because what journalists are saying, and ex-editor of the New York Times, Jill Abramson, said publicly that this is the most secretive government that they have ever had, ever. I mean, they have 8 cases of criminal investigation of whistleblowers they had in July of this year. Maybe there's 18 now. Journalists are being prosecuted for publishing, they're being spied on. I mean, in the United States, change whatever was the slogan, So I think what's scariest here is that it's happening in states that sometimes we could have spoken highly of, in UK, United States, and so on. So we're all in the same very shaky boat. But I just wanted to jump in because I felt that you were unduly complimenting.
No, but there was a reason that why Guardian moved Snowden files to states, because they would never publish it in the UK for the pure injunction and everything. So, but is there any speculative question? Is there any growing tendency of even the public be less likely to support journalists when they're being prosecuted? Or it very much depends on the context. Or
And also, that was one part of the discussion also around the whole Levison inquiry. I mean, the fact that there are a number of journalists that have behaved badly and actually illegally. I mean, that's a whole different category. I always think, there's exercising, your right to freedom of expression as a journalist in, doing your job basically, and then there's breaking the law. Those are different types of situations that have to be judged according to their context. And I understand that, you know, in all the hustle and the bustle and the news cycle and so on, those things can get conflated really easily, but I think it's actually quite important to make dogmatic separation between those two. Because, yeah, it confuses the discussion on journalists who are just doing their work.
Yeah, but that was what happened in the UK was this huge public outreach gave politicians public support that they should do something about the media. Feral beasts, as Mr. Garrett said. Solutions. Part two.
Mr. Krajcik hasn't said anything in like half an hour.
I'm still waiting for the answer actually about the part of the problem. I don't see actually, I think we are a little bit overreacting on this your case, because it's the only case that I'm aware of.
It's not the only case, there's one in the making.
Yeah, but we all know, including probably, I'm sure that also prosecution knows that if they will insist on that case, they will lose in the end anyway. It's not the point, of course. It's not the point. The question, because we were off the topic, and I thought that you were going to talk about this particular case or similar cases. If you are staying on the things that we were talking before, I still must say that I see journalism or certain journalists as part of the problem, because when things could be cleared or years ago, we haven't heard things that we all knew. Even today we didn't hear. What Natasha said, that we never heard about any opinion on other journalists or doings of media, things like that. It's kind of bizarre hate-love relationship, I think, between journalists in the different media. Because I don't want to talk about particular cases, but I saw that there are some for things that a lot of journalists know, there is no interest to publish, even though it was quite interesting. We all know about a lot of cases now, or I know that a lot of journalists are being charged criminal information, at least. Criminal information by certain officers of the agencies, and we all know that, and I've never read about it. I can imagine if in the UK probably one public officer would put 20 complaints against journalists, that he would be in his office for a week. We never read about it, but you all knew. I won't say about things, but I know because I was talking to journalists about things. I never read about it. So, what I want to say is that in Slovenia I see quite interesting phenomenon that journalists are on one side, they're quite connected, on the other side they're quite, how should I say, not disconnected, but when we are talking about the rights of journalists, they are connected. When we are talking about the things that are happening to certain medias, we just don't talk about it. Or we have cases like the people that are doing something and it is seen as outrageous by the media or by the journalists. When certain journalists do something like that, nobody says. It's quite normal. Yeah, well, I can say because I have a free speech. When we had a case a few months ago, when a journalist editor was fighting for his job as a mayor, that's my opinion, is that that's quite doubtful. But I never read about it. Nobody asked himself, well, is this okay? I don't see it as okay.
A candidate for mayor.
Yes, I don't see it as okay, or maybe we could debate on it and I can be convinced that it's perfectly okay, but what I want is debate. I never had a chance to read any article that one would say, well, I don't think that's okay. You know what's my point? My point that it's quite a lot of times that I'm searching in the media, in every media, for things that I will treat, and I never find it. That's what scares me.
But when we write about it, you say that we're making too much noise, like in Anushka's case. You said that you said that we all are making too much panic about Anushka's case, but on the other hand, you were saying that no one wants to write about cases happening to journalists.
No,
How does that come together?
I didn't mean that we are making too much noise about this particular case, but I don't want that you are talking as it happens every day. It doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen. In Slovenia, it quite rarely happens that you have a criminal case against journalists for any, except for private prosecution. That's different. But you don't have a lot of cases when the government or public sector would prosecute or would file a request to prosecute journalists. It happens that the private prosecution is in rare cases there are the case is ended in almost every time the case is ended in favor of journalists. So what I was talking about, I was talking about that we present that it's everyday's problem that journalists are being hunted here, so because they are not.
That's true, because there is another public wisdom that's heard very often, and it makes no sense to sue a journalist in Slovenia because you will lose in the end.
But that's not the point,
Some
though.
people think so.
We are talking about the fact that there are lawsuits, not only my case. Okay, there's another case regarding classified information at Munich. It's still not as it's not as progressed as my case. But no, we are being prosecuted, and we should be talking about this. And yes, we were not talking about it enough before, but we are now taking this opportunity to talk about it, and we should talk about it and discuss it. But it is not true that public institutions are not abusing their right or their unfair advantage in terms of criminal prosecution of journalists for defamation. I was questioned by the police in Postaja Bežigrad regarding because the director of the competition protection agency felt that the agency itself, was defamed by an article concerning actually your company. So I mean,
I was questioned too in that case.
Yeah, but
and our journalists were questioned too.
other journalists, yes, journalists.
No,
that's true. That's not true. Financer were publishing like daily when they were questioned as possible information sources. I was charged with defamation for this. So the agency, the competition protection agency, felt it was defamed. I don't understand how they can have feelings, but I mean the agency was defamed. So this is happening, and we had banks. I mean the Bank of Slovenia is suing the information commissioner. I mean this is happening. It's not daily, you know, like, but it is happening, and it's happening more and more. And
Well, that's a bad bank.
Question.
Question
for the public. A question for the public. One thing that we also hear quite often on Twitter and among some other colleagues is that people just are not interested in stories about chip media writing about other media. Is it true or not? Yeah, it's most of your journalists.
Can I just add something? In Slovenia, it's a very popular practice for media to write about other media. You have several internet portals that are writing about journalists specifically. They personally attack chosen journalists, and of course with their agenda, because these websites are on a payroll of pillars of capital and political power. I could also add that the president of our journalist society is quite an honorary guest almost on several of these websites. Anytime actually he says something or our society proposes something, and he's first in line when attack comes from the other side. But it's quite a practice in transition countries. It was the same in Russia in the 90s. They had these special websites called the Kompromats that were actually containing nothing more than an anonymous letter throwing up bollocks and shit about another guy, another journalist there. So actually, when you compare ourselves to UK and USA, I would say we should compare ourselves to the Balkan countries, Eastern Europe and Russia, because we can learn a lot from there.
Good, and I think that also Natasha and Anushka are quite regular guests of those sites.
Yes.
Toilets, I call them.
In Montenegro, a journalist is being framed for having sex with a dog. So I think we're still a little bit away from there. So.
We had sex with dogs.
Does anyone want to answer the question?
Sex between watchdogs.
I have one question. I'm missing someone on that. Is it working?
Yeah,
You hear it.
You hear it. Okay. I'm missing someone on that stage, and that is someone from either prosecution or from judicial system, or someone, or let's say lawyers in general, apart from colleagues who are mostly working on our side, so to speak. So I would like to ask Ms. Jensen, is MLDI working in the countries where you are having problems? Are you working there also with the people, let's say, on that side, either in terms of educating lawyers or having workshops or just say meetings with judges, prosecutors and so on, and increasing their knowledge about freedom of expression and the fact that journalists do often break some certain laws if it is in public interest, and that, you know, perhaps the judges or the prosecutors should not always just automatically attack journalists for doing something.
Those are all very good points and also all very important activities, but unfortunately beyond the mandate of LDI. We really focus on assisting media and journalists to defend themselves. And like I just mentioned, it's part of the puzzle, and it's definitely something that should be worked on, but by others. It's saying that training of journalists is important, but that's also something that's for others.
I would also like to ask something, Nani, Jensen. What are your feelings? I mean, when journalists call you from all parts of the world, what is there? Are they stressed? Are they scared? How do they feel? You know, do they see this persecution as a big problem? Because as we see, even Anushka, I know that she contacted you, so obviously, you know, she was seeking, she didn't, but obviously people are seeking help. They are in stress. I mean, this is a problem. And the other question, what are those international courts for you? Are they these arbitrary courts that help to correct the wrong decisions of national courts? What is this relationship? How do you use these international courts for your work?
The first question, I think being sued or being involved in those is stressful for anyone. I think it is all the more so when it also touches upon your professional life. And there have been many, great judgments that say this very explicitly, that for journalists, of course, the exercising of your right to freedom of expression also is your work, and it's a very personal type of work that you do. So I can imagine that adds an extra dimension of stress and distress to it all. So yes, I think overall most of our clients are quite worried. I think some of them have gotten a bit used to the system, so they know that this is something that happens. We have clients that just kind of continuously get harassed. They get calling for questioning at regular intervals. And at some point in time, that is just annoying, but knowing that they have the resource at that point in time to bring a lawyer with them when they go for info questioning, for example, is already a lot of reassurance for them that things are less likely to completely go off the rails. But yes, I think no one likes to go to court except for lawyers, perhaps. As regards the international mechanisms, I'm not quite sure if you're asking if you consider them as a kind of a corrective mechanism for national. Yeah. Yes, that's what they're there for. They're there to clarify the international standards that are applicable in a certain situation. So, in Council of Europe countries, you look at the European Convention, and the European Court will have the final say on that point. Within the African region, you have the African Commission and the African Court. You have some sub-regional courts there, Inter-American Court, of course, and then there are also the non-binding but authoritative bodies that you can go to, such as the Human Rights Committee, which looks at the implementation of the ICCPR. And I think that both those that are binding and the ones that are not binding, because also when you look at binding decisions, there's always the issue of implementation, which not every country is as willing to engage with as willingly. It's the matter that there's a statement of principle and there's a signal that's being sent back to the national court. Look, you got it wrong. Next time, please do better. And this is something that, in and of itself, might not be enough, and therefore also something that civil society has to pick up in a country to make sure that it's used as a lobbying tool. If you're going for law reform, judgments such as those are excellent examples to show to your legislature and say, like, look, what we have on the books right now is wrong. It has to be improved upon, and also that needs to be published on, because people need to know. People need to know that the results that they've read about in their national newspapers, sometimes years ago, were not correct, and that those courts have received a slap on the wrist, basically. Does that answer your question?
Natasha, how can journalists recognize public interest?
That's $1 million question. First of all, what I would like to stress, you have to put yourself into a position that freedom of expression is not the right of all rights. I often see in Slovenian media, or even abroad, that journalists think that freedom of expression is a tool that can be abused for every single word you write. This is not the case. When you will become aware of the fact that freedom of expression is limited also by other rights, you will be able to find what the public interest is all about. It's not easy. It's not even easy for lawyers. There is no definition of public interest. It varies from a case to case. In law, we often say that it's a case-by-case doctrine we have to use. In freedom of information cases, the public interest test always lies when we discover how the public money is spent. The public interest test always lies there when we discover the deviations or even criminal offenses within the public sector daily course of work. In media cases, it depends. I mean, I cannot tell you a definition. I don't know whether I answered your question. It's really $1 million question. But most of all, be aware that freedom of expression is not an absolute human right.
I think that what we also lack is some legal practice. I mean, nobody's trying. Last week, I was doing a story on this loyalty scheme card. And I filed like 11 this application to get my own data on what this loyalty scheme card has saved me. I didn't do it in my name because everybody would recognize what are my intentions, and I used some other people, just normal citizens who use their loyalty scheme cards. And the next day when we sent this demands to get our data, we got 3 of my helpers were called by the institutions that they were addressing their emails, being totally worried, why, what they're demanding, what kind of data, whatever. And it was totally obvious that people who are running the themes, they probably never have read, the Freedom of Information Act and Personal Information Protection Act and everything. So they didn't know even how to respond to a legal and totally normal application by a citizen and a consumer. And it's the same for, you're asking what the public interest is. I don't know. You should try, use legal documents, try to get information, then file a complaint and get the answer.
Maybe just, if I can try to explain what the public interest is all about in Anushka's case. For example, if Anushka would write only about that some people from Blood and Honor are also members of the Social Democrat Party, this is not a public interest. Who cares if they are members of that party? But the public interest for me is whether those people are used to start fights and demonstrations, for example. This is what the public has the right to know.
I disagree there, actually. I think the public has the right to know that there's an extremist party members in one of the...
It's not just that.
No, I think that in and of itself is something that the public has the right to know, because it might influence the decision as who they're going to vote for. It's a very crucial piece of information.
And this is published before election, it's really painful for the other side.
So you see, we don't agree.
Just like to add a sentence or two, because regarding the other side, the Slovenian courts often decide in media cases in contrary to the legal practice that is already established by European courts.
True.
And I think that there's a lot of work to do also on the other side. So, okay, in the end you always win, but it takes 5 to 10 years. There are like decisions were made, I don't know, in 2005, 2006 regarding an issue that is that we discuss in Slovenia today, and it will take 6 years, so it will be 2020 when we get another confirmation that we were right all along. So maybe that, but maybe that comes with time, so that actually the perception of courts also and lawmakers, that they actually media are an easy target. So maybe they should think a little about media's role in society, regardless of their mistakes in making their decisions.
You're probably in conclusion. We're keeping you here for quite a while.
Just one thought more. To go from a micro level to a macro level, I don't know whether you know that an NGO in UK is suing UK government because of the wiretapping and because of the revelations of the Snowden. They're suing the GCHQ. This is what the real threat to freedom of expression is. Communication privacy is in threat. What USA is doing with Five Eyes Group and other countries and bilateral agreements among all the countries in the world with the USA, the NSA is a supermarket for all the information gathered there. The USA is gathering 98% of all the internet traffic from the transatlantic cables, including what you journalists are doing on the internet. So if we forget about communication privacy, forget about freedom of expression as well. So this is what my fear for the future of the media and for the future of all human beings is basically all about.
Just the battlefield is moving towards. So are you, maybe just as a, how, are you also cooperating, because one of the things that you can see in the US, there is Electronic Frontier Foundation, for example. They're doing about the internet rights, but a lot of their decisions and a lot of their activities is based upon media, freedom of expression, because the media actually means the internet today in many ways. how strong is this separation between journalists and media companies and, on the other hand, media, also internet activists? Because there is still a strong separation when you hear this ACTA stuff or many things. They're mostly interested by or addressed by internet activists, not the media itself. For example, ACTA was a great case because ACTA was sold to media as, you know, that's an international agreement that will get you paid for your work, you will get paid for your copyright and stuff, so it's in your best interest. The internet activists, on the other hand, said, well, that's a huge problem and a threat for freedom of information and freedom of expression. So do you see this separation between the media and the internet activists and NGOs closing or widening?
Again, I think that's very case specific. We recently filed a joint advocacy brief at the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Delphi, the website, which was third-party comments. And in that, there was a really broad coalition of over 30, both traditional and new media houses and other actors, because that is something that touches upon everyone's interests. So I think it really depends on the circumstances, whether or not there is I don't think there's a trend as to those two growing apart or closer together.
Yeah, I think we should do some justice to this sign out there saying cold beer and showing to this direction. It's not this route, so maybe it's time for us to stop and leave.
I just want to take this opportunity, since we're all here, and the Media Festival La Pay Forward is going to happen soon, and we were just talking about how we're all being surveilled, and we, I think, agree that journalists do not know enough of possibilities of surveillance of their work and so on, and possibly discovery of their sources through surveillance. We have an information security expert coming to the festival. Arjen Kampfris is his name, and he's awesome. So if you want to learn about information security, come to the festival.
Thank you all for your patience and listening to us. And now I can